I had the whole day off, and honestly, I was pretty happy about it. The weather was cold and miserable, rain coming down on and off all day, with that gray, heavy sky that makes you want to do nothing but stay inside. So, that's what I did. I spent most of the day playing video games, barely moving from the couch except to grab snacks. It was one of those lazy, uneventful days, and I was all for it. By around 5 p.m., the rain started picking up, heavy drops hammering against the windows, and I noticed lightning flashing in the distance. The storm felt like it was settling in for the night, so I figured, why not lean into it? I threw together some dinner and decided to watch a horror movie. I mean, the storm was already setting the mood, might as well go all out. I shut off all the lights, got comfortable on the couch, and let the movie pull me in. Outside, the wind howled and rain poured down, making the shadows in the room seem deeper somehow. By the time the credits rolled, the storm had gotten even worse. The lightning strikes were close now, lighting up the room for brief, blinding moments followed by thunder that shook the walls. Still, the power held, so I just stayed on the couch, scrolling through my phone and trying to decide what to do next. It was around 10 p.m. when I got up to stretch my legs and refill my water. I wasn't tired yet, probably from sitting around all day, so I figured I'd watch some YouTube or something until I got sleepy. That's when I saw it. I turned around, glass in hand, and my eyes flicked to the hallway leading to the bedrooms. For just a split second, I saw a shadow move along the wall. It was so quick, I barely had time to register it, just a dark flicker that seemed to slide out of sight the moment I focused on it. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. For a few seconds I just stood there, eyes locked on the hallway, straining to hear anything over the sound of rain pounding the roof. Nothing. Just silence and that awful, crawling feeling at the back of my neck. I took a shaky breath, forced a laugh, and tried to brush it off. "It's just the lightning," I muttered, more to convince myself than anything. Or maybe my eyes playing tricks on me after that movie. But even as I filled my glass, I couldn't help but glance back down the hallway, half expecting to see something staring back at me. When I didn't, I felt a little silly. Trying to shake it off, I checked outside through the kitchen window. The streets were practically rivers by then, water flooding the curbs and trees bending dangerously in the wind. We didn't get storms like this often, so it was a bit freaky seeing the town look so hostile. I went back to the couch and put on some random YouTube videos, the kind you don't really need to pay attention to. My mind kept drifting back to that shadow, though, replaying it over and over. I was trying to convince myself it was nothing, just my mind on edge from the movie and the storm. But then I saw it again. This time, it was behind the TV, a shadow that seemed to peek out from the hallway entrance, and slip back just as I glanced over. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear the rain. I whipped my head around, eyes wide, but again nothing. "What the hell?" I whispered, voice barely more than a breath. I sat up straight, eyes darting to every corner of the room, my skin prickling with that awful, paranoid feeling of being watched. This wasn't normal. I'd never had my mind play tricks on me like this before. I forced myself to get up, every muscle tensed, and started checking the house. I went room to room, flicking on lights and peering around doors, even opening closets. The whole time, the storm raged outside, lightning turning the windows into mirrors and thunder making the glass rattle. But the house was empty. Completely empty. Trying to calm down, I flopped back onto the couch, ran a hand over my face, and took a few deep breaths. "It's just the storm," I told myself, though my voice was shaking a bit. "You're just on edge because of that stupid movie." After about 15 minutes of sitting there, I decided to just call it a night. I turned off the TV and headed upstairs, the silence so thick it felt like I was wading through it. I still wasn't tired, but I figured a hot shower might help. I was in there for maybe 5 minutes, the hot water helping a bit, when a sudden, violent thud echoed through the house. The sound was deep, shaking the floor under my feet, and I went ice cold. For a second, I just stood there, water beating down, ears straining. Then, heart pounding, I shut off the water and got dressed in record time. As I opened the bathroom door, the silence hit me, a deep, suffocating silence that made my ears ring. I crept down the hallway, every floorboard groaning under my weight, and peeked into the living room. Everything looked normal, but my gut was screaming that something was wrong. When I reached the kitchen, I stopped dead in my tracks. The back door was wide open, hanging by a single hinge, splinters scattered across the floor. The door hadn't been forced inward. It was ripped outward, like something inside had thrown it open with enough force to tear it off the frame. My hands were shaking so bad, I nearly dropped my phone as I bolted upstairs, locked myself in the bathroom, and called 911. My voice came out in broken whispers, stumbling over words as I told the operator someone had broken in. As I waited for the cops, I kept replaying every shadow I'd seen that night, that horrible realization settling in. Whoever tore open that door hadn't broken in. They'd already been inside, watching me, slipping through the shadows whenever I turned away. The thought made my stomach twist with fear. When the police finally arrived, they searched the house top to bottom, guns drawn and flashlights cutting through the darkness. After what felt like hours, one of them came back up the stairs, face pale and tight. The hinges and the lock weren't broken from the outside, they were forced outward. Like someone had left in a rage, slamming the door so hard it ripped the screws out. I moved out not long after that. I still don't know how long they were there, what they wanted, or why they left so violently. But every time it storms, I find myself glancing at shadows a little too long, waiting for them to move. This happened last winter, during a week when the snow just wouldn't let up. I work a hybrid job, so sometimes I'm in the office, but most days I work from home. That week, though, the snow was piling up so much that I didn't even bother trying to make it in. My house is small, just one story with 2 bedrooms and not much else, so I'd set up my workspace by the bedroom window, which at the time seemed like a great idea. The days blurred together, just me at my desk with the wind howling outside and snowflakes clinging to the glass. I'd get up occasionally to make coffee or stretch, but for the most part, I was locked in, trying to focus on work and not get distracted by the whiteout conditions outside. It was kind of cozy, in a way. By the time I logged off around 8 p.m., the sky was pitch black, and the snow was still coming down hard. I heated up some leftovers, did a bit of cleaning, and decided to take the trash out before it got too late. The cold hit me the second I stepped outside, sharp and biting, and I hurried to the curb, the snow crunching under my boots. But as I was heading back to the door, something caught my eye, something that made me stop short. Along the side of the house, the snow was disturbed, not just random patches, but clear, deliberate footprints. My heart picked up a bit, breath clouding in the air as I stared at them. They weren't my prints, that much was obvious. They were too big, too deep. I hesitated for a second, then, curiosity getting the better of me, followed them. The prints led straight to my bedroom window, the same one I'd been sitting by all day, completely oblivious. My blinds were down, but not all the way. There were tiny gaps where someone outside could have peeked in. The thought made my stomach twist. I took a shaky breath and backed away slowly, eyes flicking to the dark tree line at the edge of the yard. The snow covered everything in a quiet, suffocating blanket, and the silence suddenly felt too thick, too heavy. I rushed back inside, locked the door, and pulled the blinds all the way down, my hands trembling a bit. "It's fine," I muttered to myself, though my voice was a little too shaky to be convincing. "Probably just some kid messing around or someone cutting through the yard." But even as I said it, I knew that didn't make sense. The prints were right up against the window, almost like whoever made them had stood there for a while, watching. I checked the locks on every door and window at least twice before finally going to bed, but sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside made me flinch. Eventually, I must have drifted off because the next thing I knew, sunlight was creeping through the curtains, and my phone alarm was going off. Still groggy, I shuffled over to the window, not really thinking about the prints from the night before, until I pulled the curtain back and saw them again. Fresh ones, same size, same path, leading right up to the window. I stumbled back a step, my heart slamming against my ribs. Someone had been there again. During the night. Watching. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely get a grip on my phone as I dialed the non-emergency police line. I tried to keep my voice steady as I explained what was going on, but the operator could probably hear how freaked out I was. They sent a patrol car to check things out, but by the time the officer arrived, snow had already started to fill in the prints. All he could do was take a report and tell me to call if anything else happened. That whole day, I couldn't focus on work for more than a few minutes at a time. I kept glancing at the window, half expecting a face to suddenly appear between the blinds. The snow kept falling, thick and relentless, covering the tracks until it was like they'd never been there. By 8 p.m., it was dark again, and I hadn't left my desk since morning. My back ached, and my eyes felt gritty from staring at the screen. I got up to stretch, pushing the blinds aside just a bit to check outside. The snow was smooth and untouched, no footprints, no signs of anyone lurking around. Relief washed over me, and I let out a shaky breath. But as I moved to drop the blinds, my eyes drifted down to the window latch. My heart lurched into my throat. The latch was undone. I'd triple-checked it the night before. I was sure of it. My hands shook as I tested the window, and it slid open way too easily, icy air seeping in and making my breath cloud. Someone had unlocked it. Someone had been that close enough to reach through the tiny gap in the blinds and flick the latch open. I stumbled back, chest tight with panic, and bolted to grab my keys. I didn't even bother putting on a jacket, just threw on my boots and practically flew out to the car, fingers fumbling to call 911. My voice was high and shaky as I tried to explain, eyes darting to the house, half expecting to see someone peering through the windows. When the cops got there, they went in first, flashlights cutting through the dark rooms. I waited in the driveway, engine running, hands clenched so tight around the steering wheel that my knuckles turned white. Every second stretched on forever, the silence in the car suffocating. Then the front door swung open, and an officer emerged, dragging a man out in handcuffs. Both of them were smeared with blood, like there'd been a struggle. The man was maybe in his 40s, eyes wild, face scratched and bleeding. He glared at me as they hauled him past, eyes dark and empty, and I had to fight the urge to throw the car into reverse and just floor it out of there. The officer explained later that they'd found him hiding in the hallway closet, the same hallway I'd walked down a dozen times that night, completely oblivious. He must have slipped in when I was distracted, or maybe even while I was at work, creeping through the shadows and waiting. The thought made my stomach churn. I stayed at a friend's place for a while after that, too scared to be alone in that house. Even now, months later, every time I hear the wind howl or see footprints in the snow, my heart starts to race. The idea that someone was there, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike, yeah, I don't think I'll ever really get over that. So, this happened a while back when I was visiting my parents over spring break. I decided to try out Airbnb for the first time since hotels in that area were either fully booked or way too expensive. The town was small, the kind where everyone knows everyone, and the Airbnb I found was cheap and seemed decent enough based on the pictures. After a 2-day drive, I finally pulled into the driveway just after sunset. The neighborhood was off. That's the best way to describe it. It was quiet, too quiet. No streetlights, no cars driving by, and all the houses were dark except for the one I was staying in. I mean, it wasn't even that late, maybe around 7 p.m., but it felt like I'd pulled into a ghost town. Brushing it off as me just being tired from the drive, I grabbed my bags, locked the car, and headed inside. The house was a bit older but cozy enough. Wood floors that creaked with every step, dim lighting that made the shadows stretch long. It had a certain charm but also a vibe that made the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. I tossed my stuff down, grabbed some snacks, and decided to just chill for the night. I had no plans other than resting up before visiting my parents the next day. A couple of hours passed, and it was probably around 9 or 10 p.m. when I heard a knock at the door. Not a light, polite knock. This was steady, almost rhythmic, like whoever was outside wasn't planning on leaving anytime soon. My first thought was maybe it was the host needing something, or maybe a neighbor. I checked my phone, but there were no missed calls or messages. Cautiously, I made my way to the door, my heart already picking up speed. I cracked it open just a bit, leaving the chain on, and peeked out. A man was standing there, maybe in his 30s, wearing a black winter hat and a worn-out red flannel. His eyes looked a little wild, like he was surprised to see me. Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He kind of mumbled something I couldn't catch, then turned around and walked away without another word. I just stood there, watching him disappear into the darkness, every instinct screaming that something wasn't right. I double-checked the locks, made sure all the windows were secured, and tried to convince myself he had the wrong house or something. The rest of that night, I barely slept. Every creak, every groan of the old house made me tense up, my eyes flicking to the door. By morning, I felt ridiculous. I mean, yeah, it was creepy, but the guy didn't try to force his way in or anything. Maybe he was just confused or drunk. I spent most of the day out visiting my parents, trying to shake off the unease. It was actually nice being with them, helped distract me from the weirdness the night before. By the time I got back to the Airbnb, it was dark again, and I was exhausted. I heated up some leftovers, put on a random movie, and tried to relax. But right around 9 p.m., that same knock came again, loud, deliberate, and never-ending. My stomach dropped. I crept to the door as quietly as possible, this time looking through the peephole. It was him again. Same hat, same red flannel, standing there motionless, staring straight ahead. I only cracked the door open a sliver this time, chain still on, and tried to sound braver than I felt. "Can I help you? Did you need something?" I asked, my voice a little too high. His reaction was off. He just stared for a second, like he was trying to process who I was. Then, in the same flat, monotone voice as before, he mumbled, "No," turned on his heel, and walked away. I shut the door so fast the walls rattled, locked it, and backed away, my hands shaking. This was beyond weird now, this was downright terrifying. I double-checked every door and window, pulled all the curtains tight, and tried to convince myself it was just a misunderstanding. But my gut was telling me otherwise. I left the bedroom door open so I could hear better, every sound making my heart jump into my throat. A few hours passed, and I started to think maybe it was over. I turned off the lights and climbed into bed, finally feeling my eyes get heavy. But then, I woke up to a sudden, violent banging on the door, so hard it made the floor vibrate. I bolted upright, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. The hits just kept coming, relentless, like whoever was out there was trying to break the door down. I slid out of bed, my legs shaking, and peeked down the hallway. Shadows moved outside the windows, dark figures shifting just beyond the glass. My blood ran cold when I realized it wasn't just the one guy. There were multiple people out there. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet, and grabbed my phone with trembling hands. As I hit 911, I heard the back door's knob rattle violently. Then a face appeared in the back window, eyes dark and hollow, staring straight at me. I turned and sprinted to the bedroom, locking the door and shoving a chair under the handle, my fingers so shaky I could barely dial. As the operator answered, I tried to explain what was happening, my voice cracking with panic. For what felt like hours, I sat there, listening to the sounds of windows being tested, doors creaking under pressure, footsteps crunching around the house. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything went silent. The only sound left was my own ragged breathing. Red and blue lights flooded the front yard moments later, and I nearly cried with relief. The police moved fast, and after what seemed like an eternity, one of them knocked on the bedroom door. I flung it open, barely able to hold back tears. The officer's expression was grim. They hadn't just run off, one of them was hiding inside the house. They found him crouched in a closet, covered in scratches and blood after trying to fight off the cops. The host's reaction made it all worse. When the police contacted him, he seemed more annoyed than concerned, brushing it off like it was no big deal. They never figured out who the men were or why they targeted that house. I left the next morning, barely able to get any sleep that night, eyes constantly darting to the windows. To this day, I can't help but wonder if they ever came back, waiting for the next unsuspecting guest to pull into that dark, empty driveway.